Good afternoon. I'm Brian Bonner, the chief editor of the Kyiv Post, and some of you may have come to listen to my talk called What We Can Learn from the British News Media, and others may have come for the drawing that we're going to have at the end of my presentation. The lucky winner, and only journalists this time are eligible, so I hope you brought your business card, journalists. My lovely assistant, Natasha Martusova, will be taking your business cards, and I'll be drawing them out of the hat. And the winner gets a free week course at In Lingua in Cheltenham, England, accommodations, and all free. Those are free. The only thing the participant has to do is come up with the airfare and the visa. So we look forward to that. Now I'd like to start the presentation, but to do that I need Sasha. And I want to introduce, I'm an American and I'm living in Ukraine, but there's a lot actually we can learn about the British press because the British news media has a very, very wide and deep reach, not only in England and the United Kingdom, but across the world. And these are some of the points I want to get across. But first, I don't know where this originated, but it's like a BBC comedy skit on the influence and importance of the British press through a satire piece about a prime minister, a British prime minister. So Sasha, if you could roll the clip.
I suppose the origin of this criticism is this rumor about another big scandal in the city.
How did you guess? Oh, Humphrey. I've decided to respond to all this criticism about a scandal in the city. The press is demanding action.
What are you proposing to do?
I shall appoint someone.
And when did you take this momentous decision?
Today, when I read the papers.
But when did you first think of it?
Today, when I read the papers.
And for how long, may I ask, did you weigh the pros and cons of this decision?
Not long. I decided to be decisive.
Prime Minister, if I may say, I think you worry too much about what the papers say.
Only a civil servant could have made that remark, Bernard. I have to worry about them, particularly with the party conference coming up. These rumours of a scandal just won't go away, you know.
Well, let's not worry about it until it becomes something more than a rumour. I'd just like to show you the cabinet agenda.
No, not just now. Humphrey, this is rather more important.
With respect, Prime Minister, it is not. The only way to understand the press is to remember that they pander to their readers' prejudices.
Don't tell me about the press. I know exactly who reads the papers. The Daily Mirror is read by people who think they run the country. The Guardian is read by people who think they ought to run the country. The Times is read by the people who actually do run the country. The Daily Mail is read by the wives of the people who run the country. The Financial Times is read by people who own the country. The Morning Star is read by people who think the country ought to be run by another country. And the Daily Telegraph is read by people who think it is.
Prime Minister, what about the people who read The Sun?
Sun readers don't care who runs the country as long as she's got big tits.
Okay, that's the British humor to make the point. There's a tremendous variety in the British press. I think that's one of the great things to admire about it. It's got everything, Fleet Street, the tabloids on the low end, where, like The Sun, where you'll find pictures of naked women on the front pages or inside pages, appealing to the lowest possible denominator or the common, I guess, most popular type of way to sell papers. And you've got people, from all ends, regional, local, and England has an incredible national scope, at least 5 national papers or press outlets, the Independent, the Telegraph, the Guardian, the Times, the Financial Times, the Economist, and among those, the Financial Times and the Economist are really international newspapers, are international news organizations with an international reach. And then there's the BBC, which is a taxpayer-funded, huge news organization that has reach in many countries of the world. So when we look at the British press, it influences Ukraine, it influences the United States, it actually influences a lot of the journalism that goes on in the world. And there's reasons for that. There's historical reasons for that. The British had an empire. It was where the Industrial Revolution took place. So you see in the 18th and 19th centuries the emergence of a middle class, an educated middle class, and they demanded information. They demanded variety. They demanded good sources. And newspapers evolved to create this demand. And if you look at the statistics, they're a little hard to come by, but in Great Britain, the circulation per capita, per person, is much higher than many places in the world, higher than the United States, I think twice as high as Ukraine, and only just below the Scandinavian countries and Japan, which really demand information. The Guardian and other British papers have played key roles in major investigations like WikiLeaks. For those of you who don't know, WikiLeaks is the trove of documents, classified American documents that got hacked into and released publicly. The Guardian was one of the newspapers that got a lot of Edward Snowden's the material, published it. It included conversations, you know, between prime ministers, government leaders, many other people that the government leaders would have preferred not to have been made public. Come on in, enjoy. They are so influential in some ways that they shape elections. You know, it's rumored that you know, the British Prime Minister has to check with Rupert Murdoch, who's one of the big moguls, and make sure that he's okay to you know, before they have an election, because they don't want the newspapers to take a campaign against them, which has been demonstrably fatal to the election chances of many politicians. Now, with this power comes responsibility, and it hasn't always been used very well in Great Britain. They've gone to excess. Some of you might have heard about the hacking scandal, where a number of Rupert Murdoch papers actually illegally hacked into the emails and phone calls, voicemails of government officials, the royal family, other politicians, and exposed private conversations. Totally against the law, totally a crime by itself. So this competition for the information got so overheated that a big segment of the press, or an influential segment of the press, decided that they would take the law into their own hands. They would not obey the laws. This scandal came to a head when there was a 13-year-old girl named Millie Dowler, who was murdered, I believe, in 2000, several years back. It turns out that one of the tabloids had hacked into her voicemail, potentially compromising the murder investigation, deleting some of the, apparently her phone was set so that if they checked the email, it would be deleted 72 hours later. Apparently they got this before the investigators, and fortunately it did not compromise the investigation. The person who murdered this girl was found, convicted, or tried and convicted, and sentenced to prison. But that scandal and numerous other scandals led to regulation in Great Britain. We're not sure how that's going to go. They replaced a voluntary press commission with one that has more legal power to regulate what the press does, how it behaves. And this, on the one hand, can lead to more responsibility. On the other hand, it can deny the public access to legitimate investigations, information, because as we know, governments like to keep their secrets, and our job in the press is usually to get the secrets out. and expose them to the public. Now, well, there's a lot to be said about the free press in Great Britain. They have also had a negative influence in other ways. There was a phenomenon several years ago that affected not only British journalists, but Ukrainian journalists and journalists operating in Ukraine. It was the thing called libel tourism. It turned out that Great Britain had one of the easiest laws for a public figure or a politician or a businessman to file a lawsuit against a newspaper if they didn't like something the newspaper published. It created enormous problems because it created the burden of proof was on the journalists to prove what they had written was absolutely true. And in cases of public figures, it put a premium on a person's, put more value on a person's reputation rather than the public's right to know this information. In America, there's a different standard. We believe that public officials are open to criticism, are basically cannot sue you because by virtue of their power and their public presence, and this often extends to celebrities, they have given up some of their rights to privacy. So the standard is much higher. To sue in America, if it involves a politician or a public businessman, the burden of proof is shifted to the person who's actually filing the lawsuit, making the accusations, so that if you don't like something, you have to prove in court that you have not only lied about this person, but you've maliciously lied about this person. And that has effectively killed many lawsuits in America and given the press the robust nature that it has. Now, many rich billionaires around the world took advantage of the libel laws in Britain and started what this cottage industry is called libel tourism. And basically, it was set up to the point, the law went to such ridiculous extremes that it didn't apply only to things written about the person in British newspapers. It applied to articles written about the person anywhere in the world. As long as there was an internet connection and that article could be accessed in Great Britain, that made that in the opinion of the law and many British judges, it gave them jurisdiction over the case. This created a huge, huge problem for authors, and not only journalists, but authors, scientists, public health officials, but journalists as well. And that eventually came to hit Ukraine. In Ukraine, in 2007, 2008, Obrazovatel and the Kyiv Post were targets of libel lawsuits in Great Britain, by Rinat Akhmedov, the billionaire, who's the richest billionaire in Ukraine. Obrazovatel didn't fight it. They didn't contest their case, and they lost. It was a $100,000 damage award. I don't know, and a public apology. I don't know whether that was paid out, but it had the effect of chilling the media. The second time happened to the Kyiv Post, early 2007. It was under different ownership. I wasn't the editor at that time, but I believe the article in question was written by the publisher, Jed Sundin, at the time, who wrote basically that Rinat Akhmedov stole everything he got or didn't get it honestly. Akhmedov, understandably, was not happy with the article. He filed a lawsuit, or threatened to file a lawsuit. Jed Sundin, as I understand it, settled for a public apology and a nominal fine. So that was the environment created under these very loose or very low standard, this very easy libel law, which many think was put in just for the lawyer industry to make money. And this led to many publishers not publishing books because they were afraid of lawsuits. It also led to retaliation. America put in laws directly response to this libel tourism, where American courts and law decided that they would not recognize judgments, libel judgments that were achieved in Great Britain in those courts. So this came on, and about this time, the Kyiv Post, during my time, also got caught up into libel tourism, and we're happy to say that we actually helped spur the debate that ended this sort of abuse of the legal system. In 2011, we wrote, in 2010, we wrote an article, front page article about corruption in the gas industry, natural gas industry, that mentioned Dmitry Firtash, the other billionaire gas trader. He took offense, filed a lawsuit in London. Fortunately, we had an owner, and still have the owner, Mohammed Zahor, who agreed to defend us and finance it, the case. It never got far. It went to the pretrial stage. The judge threw it out, citing it as an abuse of the court's time, that Firtash had no standing in the courts, no standing. He didn't have a reputation in the United Kingdom. He had no standing in the courts, and the article that he sued over was actually downloaded only 21 times in the entire United Kingdom. So it was a very great ruling from our perspective. The judge ordered Firtash to pay our side the cost that we had spent so far, which was significant, $63,000. And I think more importantly, it ended the practice because the next year, Great Britain adopted laws that changed the burden of proof, that made the standard very high, that didn't accept jurisdiction for people like Firtash, who's a Ukrainian, to sue in British courts. So, well, there's still these dangers, and there's always the balancing of rights. There is a big improvement here because these cases under the old law had the great possibility to bankrupt news organizations, because if you lost, you could end up paying a huge fine that was maybe more, higher than what the newspaper was worth. You would have to pay your own court costs, and you'd have to pay the opposing team's court costs if you lost. So you could end up easily spending millions of dollars to defend yourself against one newspaper article. Fortunately, the United Kingdom said that's too much and too onerous. So what else? The internet age has upset the business model not only in the United Kingdom but the rest of the world, because historically we got money. Newspapers were very profitable. They got money from print advertisements. They got money from subscriptions. And in the age of the internet, when it first took off, everything was free. So people stopped subscribing. They stopped advertising. On the plus side, it increased the number of sources. On the other side, it bankrupted newspapers and mainstream organizations to the point where they've now, and we're still in this debate now, and the British newspapers are going through this now too, with trying to figure out different ways of financing newspapers in the internet age. One of them is a public financing model, like the BBC, where every taxpayer has to pay for this news service. Another is a paywall, and many of the newspapers in Great Britain have pioneered the paywall, which is you can't read the article on the website unless you pay for it, because the money funds the journalism, which is what which gives us the value. But we're still also trying to navigate it. I mean, many journalists have looked at the age of the internet and came to the conclusion that we see 4 different trends here that are still need to be addressed in order for news to be robust, for us to have big staffs of journalists to get the stories that you need. And they identified the consequence of internet. One is personalization. We all can be journalists now. We can all have our own blog. But when millions of us have a blog and we each have one reader, it's not very effective. The second is globalization. That is the big boys win. BBC, The Economist, Financial Times, New York Times. Now, all of us cannot be part of the big boys. The other is localization, and that is, I live in a small town, say in Ukraine. Nobody's interested in the news except for those people in that small town, generally. And the fourth, and that's the most dangerous one, is pauperization, which means impoverishment of newspapers. And that's what we're guarding against now, not only here, not only in America, but also in Great Britain. So we'll see. It's part of an ongoing evolution that's been going on for centuries, and we'll see which way we come out. So far, there's still plenty of voices, I think, throughout the world, which is good. And I think that, to close it, the thought, the United Kingdom is a good example for Ukraine in a number of ways. One is a very educated, affluent readership that demands information, that demands more than one choice, that demands 5 international newspapers and a big public TV station like the BBC. I also think the United Kingdom has things that it can teach the rest of us in journalism about implementation of paywalls, different financing models for the newspapers. So let's end it there. I think I'll be happy to take questions. I don't know when Natalia wants to start the drawing. But anybody have any questions? That's the end of my presentation.